What we've got here is a rear shock off of a 1984 XR200R. We're going to do a rebuild. I've already disassembled it and cleaned the parts. I've got my trusty bucket of solvent, which just is a 5-gallon bucket, filled halfway with diesel, kerosene, something like that is fine. It's pretty inexpensive. At some point I'd love to hook up a little motor or something so I can actually have a filtered brush just to agitate. But, we've got this sucker cleaned up here, and it was actually pretty easy to disassemble. You just kind of look at most of it. You can just kind of look at and take apart. A couple key elements is both the shock body and the external reservoir. The bladder for the reservoir is seated in here. It's held in by a little circlip. So you just kind of, while it's seated in there, you kind of have to just push it in a little bit farther to expose the circlip, and then gently remove the circlip. Usually a small screwdriver, a pair of screwdrivers, or a pick or something like that will do it. On the shock body itself, we've got 2 circlips, so you have to push in, the shock seal unit, push it in far enough to expose both of those circlips, and then remove that. The other thing that's interesting, most people have seen that this nut here is held on, it's peened, they'll grind the end. I was able to remove mine just with a air impact. Still, that was a little bit scary. I had never done it, but I didn't really care, and it came right off. I ended up just then deburring this. I'm going to reinstall this nut using some Loctite. But this is just an initial thing. Honestly, it's like a lot of people seem to be scared of this, pulling apart a shock, but this seemed pretty easy to pull apart and clean up. I've got a brand new seal for this. The valving, I'm just going to leave in line. When I pulled the valving apart, it came off as a unit, and I just kind of wired it back together just so it all stay in kind of the same order. And we're just going to reassemble it, see if the seal works, put fresh oil in, and go from there. Just another little thing on this video. I've assembled the 2 parts, the remote reservoir and the main damper. One of the things is you partially fill this guy when you're reassembling it, but then after you seat the seal and you've had this thing mostly full, but there's always going to be some kind of air in there, and usually it's going to be a pretty big amount. So what you want to do is you want to get this thing set up like so. You probably have a little bit more fresh shock fluid in this thing, in a little separate container here. And what we're going to do is then we're just going to push the shock up and down and watch as it expels the excess air out of the shock. And on the down plunge and on the up plunge, it'll suck back extra fluid, and you want to keep repeating this until you don't see any air. Now you also want to note that in here there's going to be a bunch of air in tiny bubbles, so you want to let that dissipate. As you can see, I've still got a little bit of dirt. Looks like some kind of like black dirt that I wasn't able to fully get out of the shock. That's kind of discolored a little bit, but this thing seems to be plunging quite nicely. If you look at it takes an effort to push it down. Same goes here for the remote reservoir. What we've done is install the air bladder, and you push it all the way in, push it a little bit farther so you can seat the snap ring. We partially filled this so we could push the bladder in, and some extra shock fluid is going to come out of here, and some's going to come out of here, and then we seat the snap ring. I want to make sure that this is as filled up as possible. What I'm going to do is, at this point, once I've bled the shock itself and have gotten this, I've set it up right so as much air can migrate to the top as possible. I want this filled all the way. I don't want to put any air in this yet. But what we're going to do is we're going to connect the shock to the reservoir. I'll put some air that'll seat that should seat the bladder up against the snap ring, and then what we're going to do is let the air out. We'll see what happens. We'll add more fluid as necessary to get this to stay until it stays to the top with no more bubbles coming out. Then we can connect the whole thing. And I'm just going to double check, try to get all the air purged out.